Welcome to AI for Good, the leading, action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies. In partnership with 50+ UN, sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Welcome to today's webinar in our AI for Earth and Sustainability Science Discovery Series. I'm Maria Piles from University of Valencia, and this webinar series is curated by the Aedes program Machine Learning for Climate and Earth System Science in collaboration with AI for Good. Dr. Stephen University and a research associate at the Heidelberg Institute for Geoinformation Technology. He also serves as a research consultant for the World Bank Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. And his talk today it will be about fine-scale environmental suitability mapping of Aedes aegypti, which is the mosquito larva that is bringing vector diseases, such as dengue, Zika, but he will understand. He will explain very, very well later. Stephen, I have a brief MSc and BSc degrees in Industrial Engineering from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And you have been awarded with the fellowship for interdisciplinary award for science communication. The African Aedes, the Frontier Development Lab, and the Lilium startup. So your current research focuses on multimodal spatiotemporal modeling to support equitable climate action, humanitarian and I'll ask them to Stephen.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Maria, for this really nice introduction. I'll just share my screen for the presentation, and we can get started. Okay, I hope everyone sees the screen. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me here, Maria, and for this nice introduction. My name is Stefan. I'm a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at Heidelberg University, and today I'm excited to give you some insights on my research on fine-scale environmental suitability mapping of the Aedes aegypti mosquito. I would like to divide the webinar into 3 sections. One is introduction to Aedes aegypti, where we will talk about its habitat and its relevance. In the second part, I would like to showcase how AI and specifically computer vision can assist in monitoring the environmental suitability for this mosquito species. And at the end, I would like to open up a discussion around future pathways for AI-supported surveillance. Yeah, so I'm very happy to be here, to see so many faces online, and I hope it's going to be a nice open discussion of the topic at the end. So who is Aedes aegypti? Well, Aedes aegypti is a mosquito species whose suitability habitat ranges from tropical to subtropical regions. It prefers to breed in artificial water containers, such as discarded tires, water tanks, or potted plants, which are usually found in close vicinity to human settlements, which is why Aedes aegypti is often also referred to as an urban mosquito. And the WHO estimates that around 50% of the world population is currently living in regions directly suitable for this mosquito species. And simulations considering climate change scenarios estimate also that by 2030, around 60% of the world population will live in Aedes aegypti habitat regions, turning this mosquito species into an emerging hazard. Why is it a hazard? Well, because Aedes aegypti is a primary vector of diseases such as dengue, Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. Major symptoms of these diseases include, for example, rash, muscle pain, and week-long high fever, requiring often medical treatment, especially for vulnerable age groups such as elderly and young children. And the WHO estimates that dengue alone accounts for approximately 400 million infections each year. And since globally available and effective vaccines are still limited at the moment, outbreak control is often difficult, particularly in urban context where many people live close to each other and the pathogen can spread rapidly from one infected person to another by the bite of the mosquito. And in some cities, such as Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, there are annual exceptional situations in which the capacities of the healthcare systems are exceeded, as you can also see here in this news image, and not all infected people can be adequately treated during these periods. And as these vaccines are scarce, the most effective control measure at the moment is the so-called vector control, the control of the mosquito, which is the vector. However, many of these measures are costly and subject to environmental restrictions, for example, due to health concerns when spraying insecticides in front of housing or as a precaution against resistance development. So the targeted guidance of these interventions is of importance for the effective control of dengue outbreaks as of today. Yeah, there's a whole stack of vector control measures applied in the field, dependent on the epidemic level of a dengue outbreak. The measures can range from less expensive continuous education campaigns, training people on how to clean up private properties, for example, and the inspection of strategic points like tire repair shops, to medium expensive, less frequently applied interventions like insecticide spraying, and for example, the distribution of Temifos, a larvicide that is used to inhibit mosquito larva development in water tanks. And it can also range to very expensive, highly localized and highly effective control measures like the release of wet lab created Wolbachia mosquitoes, which are mosquitoes that can carry the bacterium Wolbachia, which blocks pathogen transmission from mosquito to humans and spreads naturally within a mosquito population. In general, the more expensive an intervention is, the more guidance is required to ensure its effective application, especially given the often very limited public health budgets. So now I would like to introduce you to the state of the art in vector control guidance, which is relevant for applying AI in this context as well. So the state of the art is often sample-based entomological surveillance, which can be implemented, for example, by setting out so-called ovitraps. Ovitraps are artificial breeding containers designed to attract mosquitoes for breeding, containing a little bit of standing water. And these containers can be placed across the city to regularly and manually count mosquito egg and larva as a proxy for adult mosquito population density, and therefore relevant to guide vector control. However, as mosquitoes have a limited flight range, which is estimated to be just around 200 to 1,000 meters, depending on assistance of wind, ovitraps cannot really capture the high spatial variability in mosquito abundance that can occur in heterogeneous urban landscapes like Rio de Janeiro. Because different landscapes, as you can see here in this illustrative picture, have different suitability for mosquito breeding. One example of a city where entomological surveillance is reaching its limits in monitoring mosquito populations at a citywide scale is Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which can be characterized by highly heterogeneous urban landscape, leading to substantial spatial variability in Aedes aegypti populations. And in my research, I therefore picked Rio as one of my case study regions to test out how AI, and specifically computer vision, could assist in monitoring the environmental suitability for mosquitoes to support vector control guidance. And I was quite lucky that Rio has already a large municipal operations center that coordinates disease outbreaks, but also weather, traffic, and other citywide events. And with this team, I conducted entomological field measurements and explored how to combine AI with satellite and street view imagery to interpolate ovitrap measurements to then produce high resolution and continuous urban mosquito maps for more targeted intervention guidance. So here you can see a map we created out of the sample-based entomological surveillance in Rio. Each of the points is representing a location of an ovitrap, and the color represents the mean monthly larva count for the mosquito species, Aedes aegypti, here visualized for the year 2019. And during my PhD, I ran a Bayesian spatiotemporal model to build these habitat scale Aedes aegypti environmental suitability maps for Rio, which you can see on the top right. And during modeling, I chose a negative binomial likelihood distribution, as the ovitrap count data shows overdispersion, meaning that the variance is bigger than the mean. So here we're dealing with a lot of zero count data, as you can see also in this histogram. We then generated a stack of indicators describing urban landscape, which are conducive for Aedes breeding, and integrated spatiotemporal random effects to model spatiotemporal autocorrelation, and second, to account for missing covariates, such as, for example, fine-scale shadow patterns, which are hard to measure, but are potentially affecting the entomological surveillance counts, which we are aiming to model and which we are using to calibrate the model. One major benefit of Bayesian models is that they allow to estimate probability distributions reporting uncertainty in terms of confidence intervals. Yeah, put simply, this approach is some kind of an interpolation that integrates spatial distance alongside key landscape similarities. And while the core addressed research gap here is the spatial resolution combined with the spatial coverage of environmental suitability maps for Aedes aegypti, the generation of high-resolution indicators, which I just mentioned to create such maps, represents another research gap in itself. And that's where I would like to give a little deep dive on now. So here you can see an overview of potential environmental suitability indicators for Aedes aegypti. Starting from hypothesis, I looked into data and methods to derive indicators which I could use in my Bayesian model. And all indicators were evaluated using ovitrap measurements, and I chose a hypothesis-driven approach to follow causality rather than correlation. An exemplary hypothesis derived from literature is that the availability of breeding containers affect ovitrap counts. But also, just to mention another one within this framework, is education levels, as well-educated people tend to remove common breeding sites more regularly in their households than others. Temporal factors were mainly included through climatic variables derived from meteorological measurements, which you can see on the top right, And I also used OpenStreetMap to analyze, for example, urban morphology, as there are studies reporting on the fact that larger roads can be barriers for mosquitoes. Yeah, you can find more detail on the individual indicators in the paper cited below. And now I would like to give a little deep dive on a generation of microhabitat indicators associated with common breeding sites, which can be derived using AI and which you can see in this figure on the left-hand side. One high-resolution spatial indicator to model environmental suitability for Aedes aegypti is relative water tank density, a common Aedes breeding site in Rio de Janeiro, and also other Latin American cities. And we hypothesized at the beginning that this relative density of water tanks is strongly associated with entomological surveillance data and can therefore be used for a high-resolution interpolation model. To generate this indicator, we detected water tanks from satellite imagery using a semi-supervised learning approach to then estimate previous collected ovitrap count data. And when considering the Aedes limited flight range of around 200 to 1,000 meters, the novel data sets of relative water tank density turned out to be a significant indicator for ovitrap field measurements in the city of Rio de Janeiro during the time period of 2019 to 2021. The computer vision model itself showed a F1 score of 0.84, including an improvement of 22% compared to a purely supervised water tank detection model, which we also trained on the site. So, which was also trained on the same amount of manual labels and for the same amount of training epochs as the semi-supervised model. Semi-supervised learning in this case means that the model learned not only from manual labels of the water tanks, but also from so-called pseudo labels, which are created by the model itself during the training. And this is a technique that can be applied not only to enhance performance, in some cases, similar to data augmentation, but also enhance generalizability and reduce manual labeling efforts. Here on the left-hand side, you can see water tank detections generated from over 10 million satellite image patches of zoom level 2022 in the city of Rio de Janeiro. On the right-hand side, we visualize common false negatives, true negatives, false positives, and true positives from our approach. Automated detections do have limitations. The models has, for example, challenges in detecting water tanks located in shadows, under shelters, or under tree canopies. And for this reason, we consider this indicator as a relative measure rather than an absolute one, as we assume that the limitations occur equally distributed over space. In a follow-up study, we then extended this research on water tank detection with breeding container detections from street view imagery. As the openly available satellite imagery used for the first study had limited resolution to detect smaller Aedes breeding containers, such as small trash bins, discarded tires, potted plants, dumpsters, storm drains, large trash bins, and plastic bags, for example. And here you can see the workflow of combining the detection of common Aedes aegypti breeding containers from satellite and street view imagery. And then on the right side, evaluating the indicators of relative container density with entomological surveillance data from the field using different flight range estimates. All indicators derived from street view imagery were also significant predictors of ovitrap counts in Rio de Janeiro from 2019 to 2022, which was quite interesting. Despite substantial coverage bias, particularly in favelas, where only limited street view images are available. A short side note here is that we normalize the relative counts by the amount of street view images available in each region. So that's what we included in the method. Here you can see a visual inspection of the results from the street view imagery detections. Common false negatives included container located behind parking cars or fences, which were really hard to detect with our model. And common false positives included, for example, stones used as street curbs, mistakenly identified as plastic bags. And again, we are talking here about the relative indicator, which aims to model the spatial variability in entomological surveillance counts. And despite the aforementioned limitations in computer vision model, the majority of detections were accurate. So most importantly is the most important fact here is that the relative index, which we calculated, turned out to be a good proxy for egg and larva counts, which is relevant for interpolating the ovitrap measurements at a later stage. And here you can see our published modeling results, including p-values for the 1,000-meter flight range buffer. Notably, small and large trash bins, as well as dumpsters, show negative coefficient estimates. This is somehow consistent with expectations, since higher densities of these formal waste collection points typically correspond to less unstructured waste on the streets, which is a more common Aedes breeding spot. So less unstructured waste is more common for Aedes. Most indicator also showed higher R-square values for larval measurements than for egg counts, although all R-square values remain very low at 1,000-meter flight range. They were higher at lower flight range estimates. A major limitation of this analysis is the potential temporal mismatch between entomological surveillance data we used and the satellite at suitability imagery. We were also reporting on this in the paper. However, one can somehow assume for some containers that they are relatively static over time. So for example, water tanks, they are not moving around. Might be just the case that some of them are replaced by others and new water tanks will occur. So after extracting 79 high-resolution indicators, not only on relative breeding container density, but also indicators on climate, socioeconomics, morphology, as you saw before in the figure, and also on water accumulation, we created monthly environmental suitability maps for Aedes aegypti in Aedes habitat size using Bayesian statistics and ovitrap measurements. And here you can see a zoom-in picture of these maps where the black small points refer to ovitrap locations and the circles represent the assumed flight range buffer, basically representing the areas of measurement validity of the ovitrap measurements. And the areas in between were filled with our estimates, reducing uncertainty and supporting vector control guidance. Besides the actionable maps, which are used by the municipality of Rio de Janeiro at the moment to first guide interventions, but also to find appropriate locations for new ovitraps, the key takeaway here was that all the indicators which were used and generated from geospatial data could model around 75% of the spatial deviance measured with ovitraps. Yeah, this whole framework made out of entomological surveillance, hypothesis-driven data retrieval and feature extraction, and then the test for significance and scalable inference was closely developed with the Municipal Operations Center in Rio, as I already mentioned in the beginning, but also with researchers from Fiocruz, which is one of the world's major public health research institutions located in Brazil. And here you can see a few lab pictures I took at Fiocruz on Wolbachia mosquitoes, one quite costly vector control technique applied in Rio during larger outbreaks, for which the high-resolution maps we created are essential because this is a really costly intervention. So how will this research develop further? The presented spatially high-resolution environmental suitability maps, here marked as a green box along the other state-of-the-art methods for vector control guidance, fulfill a research gap in terms of spatial resolution and coverage. However, one key constraint is still the comparably low temporal resolution. Updates are available only on a monthly basis because the maps are currently depending on the manually collected ovitrap data. Looking ahead, AI has not only the potential to extract high-resolution spatial indicators for ovitrap interpolation, but also the potential to enhance the entomological surveillance process itself. A particular promising development in the emergence of is the emergence of so-called smart traps. These devices are equipped with cameras or microphones that can automatically detect, count, and classify mosquito species based on images or mosquito wing beat frequencies. So, of course, not only equipped with the sensors of a camera and a microphone, but also with the software to automatically detect the mosquitoes, count them, and classify them by the species. And this is therefore enabling the collection of more frequent entomological surveillance than with ovitraps. And also it is focusing on adult mosquito populations instead of immature developing stages. So it's counting adult mosquitoes, not mosquito eggs and larvae. And when combining this approach presented in this webinar with such technologies, it could enable near real-time map updates offering high spatial and temporal resolution in the future. In such an integrated framework, entomological surveillance would then provide detailed temporal patterns of mosquito population dynamics, which are really aligned with weather patterns and so on, while the Earth observation-derived features could be leveraged to capture the spatial variability. One could also phrase this vision under the term multimodal AI for microhabitat mapping of Aedes aegypti, where the smart trap could potentially collect both first meteorological metadata for entomological surveillance, but also near real-time bioacoustic observations of mosquito evidence to verify and fine-tune the models. Here you can see a schematic workflow of such a model integrating satellite, street view, and smart trap data. Yeah, so the study presented in this webinar relied on manual entomological surveillance combined with manual feature engineering, right? Looking ahead, how will this evolve as we incorporate additional data sources such as smart traps, which I just mentioned, that could substantially enhance disease control strategies? As the velocity and variety and volume of vector-related data increase, we will require robust data fusion approaches and automated feature extraction. This will be essential not only for refining local models, but also for building global high-resolution models that directly inform intervention planning. And transitioning from raw data to data-informed decision-making demands more interdisciplinary collaboration similar to this work, but also continuous adaptation and research to ultimately enable prescriptive analytics, moving us purely beyond purely descriptive analysis. Yeah, so we're coming to an end of this webinar, and I hope that you're now able to first describe the habitats of Aedes aegypti and are aware of the major dengue or vector control measures. Second, understand the concept of applying computer vision models to detect common mosquito breeding containers. You can analyze and interpret the predictive power of environmental suitability indicators using entomological data sets. So always be careful to choose the right models because they are really dispersed data sets. You have to apply a negative binomial GLM, for example, because you're dealing with a lot of zero count data. And lastly, explain the state of the art and also future in AI-assisted techniques for mosquito monitoring, and therefore also the support of guiding interventions and the control of diseases. Yeah, thank you very much for your attendance and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Stefan. It was super interesting. Thank you for showing how, your research, which has direct applicability, and the example in Rio. Super, super nice. I learned a lot. Super interesting. While we wait for questions, I have a few myself, so we can start. I'm curious because you mentioned you want to find causal relations, so you have the right indications, the right indicators. But how did you try to uncover whether the relations were causal or not? Did you apply any particular method or?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. So what I meant is that at least I see in a lot of literature that people are trying out many indicators and deriving them and putting them into association with the mosquitoes, which might not always make sense in that term. So all the indicators we chose, this was basically expert knowledge from entomologists, which were saying, okay, yeah, there's a clear association. And then we went into the data, we derived the indicators and put them into association with the entomological surveillance data. But we did not just correlate any indicators which weren't basically approved. So that's what I'm meaning with a hypothesis-driven approach. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you had the experts, no?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's really good. Now, I was thinking that perhaps there's these methods where you have the data and then you can learn whether the relation is not only correlation, but it's causation. Just wondering if you had tried those, but expert knowledge is, of course.
Yeah, and then another interesting thing is that if you have so many indicators, of course, they correlate with each other. So we ran some, I don't know if you saw it in the models, we ran some principal component analysis to remove this multicollinearity. And then basically use the principal components of all the indicators to integrate that in the model and to run the interpolations. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense because
so for example, the water tank density in Rio is highly associated also with economic status, because a lot of people which don't have access to piped water systems have these rainwater tanks for drinking water, for washing, and so on. So there is a high correlation between these indicators and census statistics, but it comes in a way higher resolution. That's why we're looking for something like this, because the mosquitoes, they don't care about census borders, right? So yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Another interesting aspect is that you chose a Bayesian network so that you get confidence interval.
Mm-hmm.
How are you actually using those intervals in the application? So you can provide the probability of, well, if you can explain a little bit more.
Yeah, so first of all, we excluded all larger areas of the study area from the whole predictions because we didn't have ovitraps in all types of structures. So a lot of the forest areas are not well monitored. So the first step was to exclude them from the predictions. And in the areas where we were certain to have enough ovitrap placements, we then ran the predictions, and they always come with a uncertainty interval basically, which is reported. But in the real world, it doesn't really affect the action. But I think that's the way one should do it. And I mean, it's ongoing work and can always be improved. But it's so yeah, the maps which are used at the moment, they're working basically with somehow the mean estimate, but they're not looking at the uncertainties. But I think there's large way for improvement in this way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because it's an important information. We're not used to have it. We're used to have the prediction and that's it. But then now we have also the confidence interval. So that can be related to a risk somehow, or we can incorporate that into the guidance of
Yeah.
So
I mean, there with the Bayesian models, it also comes with a lot of challenges because you have to set the priors right at the beginning, right, to run your model. And especially with these short flight ranges of Aedes aegypti, it's not that easy to define the borders and define how you want to interpolate the data. So it would maybe require some simulations of various parameter settings to really achieve a really robust and more realistic prediction. I think so. So models are somehow always a simplification, and that's also good that it is like that. We can always make it more complex to better reflect reality, but I think the utility of making it more complex is at some point decreasing. So you always have to value, okay, what's the effort versus versus other things. And I think the major next step, which at least I see in this field, is integrating smart trap technology and enhancing the temporal resolution of these maps. And then we have the enhancement of the temporal resolution into entomological surveillance, and also can interpolate it using the indicators derived from Earth observation in a spatial manner that aligns well with the habitat size of these mosquitoes, because we cannot place a smart trap. They're even more expensive than the standard ovitraps every 200 meters to measure the populations. And especially in these urban settings like Rio de Janeiro, the population density can change really quickly every 200,000 meters, whatever. So it's just a way to work with that, place the ovitraps or the smart traps in different urban structures to get an impression of how different urban structures are conducive for the breeding, and then learn basically the insights from these regions to make inference to regions where we don't have the traps. That's a basic idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that.
So it's not only about the classical interpolation, it's also about distance, right? So, but it can be the case that you have two measurement stations, which are, I don't know, 1,000 meters, where there's 1,000-meter distance between them, and they have similar entomological surveillance measurements, but in between there's a favela, for example, in Rio. And they are not placed in the favela, then you cannot just simply interpolate the measurements without looking at the urban structure, right? So for this case, it does not really work out to use more simple interpolation methods. That's why we also try to integrate the urban structure in this process.
Super interesting. Huh? And then I just wonder, so you're learning from these ovitraps. Then you end up with your monthly temporal resolution, because that's time that the information gets collected, right? Did I understand? Okay. So you want higher higher temporal resolution. You could kind of do like some intensive field experiments where you try to model these, right? Well, I guess the smart traps are going in that direction, but
yeah. No, of course, one could also so for example, weather data is available in higher resolution than on a monthly one, also in Rio. But it's always better in some sense to have a direct measurement of the mosquito populations, because it's really complex, and to derive it, you can somehow, of course, interpolate it also temporarily, looking at rain, humidity, and so on. But there are also a lot of different factors like interventions happening and so on. So if there are some regions where the Wolbachia mosquitoes are distributed, or there's a large distribution of insecticide spraying, Temifos, and so on, this will have an impact on the measurements and on the real population, which you don't see in the weather data, right? So, and there are a lot of interventions happening. From the state, from the country, from the city, from the mosquito world program, and so on. And it's hard to even know what's going on in the field sometimes for the locals, because there are also NGOs doing things and so on. And all these interventions, also educational practices, have an impact on the densities. You might be able to model the temporal development of the overall population in Rio, but on a local, really fine scale resolution might be hard, because you don't know what's happening in the ground. Yeah.
Okay. And regarding the interventions, is this data available? Can you use it in the model somehow to correct or to adjust?
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, there are some smaller studies happening in Rio where we know that Wolbachia mosquitoes were distributed, and analyzing the impact of these measurements, but they are basically more reduced to certain neighborhoods. On a large scale, I didn't have access to this data, and I know that the Municipal Operations Center in Fiocruz is also not aware of everything which is happening. So, but it would be nice to include that, because it has a large impact, and should also be considered when planning more interventions. But there are so many groups involved here, as I already mentioned, that it's sometimes hard to really measure what's going on in the field. And also with ovitraps and also with smart traps, I mean, you will never be able to capture all the areas and also the interventions they were taking place on small scale, right? So a lot of ongoing challenges, of course.
Okay, and just one crazy thought, like, can we use like a citizen science or social networks to help?
Yeah, it's a really good point. There are apps out there where people can take pictures of mosquitoes, share that with a geocode, and these apps also it has an AI software which can automatically classify the species, and then all this will flow into a dashboard which is available and can be downloaded by researchers. It is quite commonly used in European context. So the city of Barcelona is really advanced in this. I think it's called Mosquito Alert app. But it's the thing is that in order to apply citizen science, you also need money and investment of educating the people on that, how to use it, that it is beneficial, and so on. And especially in Rio, it's a really complex city where not all the city parts are also controlled by the police. There are different groups governing over the regions where even the government cannot go in and educate people on something or do anything. So there's always a limitation in that sense. But I think it's a good idea, and it is basically like entomological surveillance in the field. It can have a lot of power beyond just the collection of data because people get educated with it. They see the risk directly, and then can change the behavior hopefully also. But it requires a lot of input, I would say, to implement it in scale and that everyone is aware and contributes. I think so. So that the data which is coming from that is really useful. I think a lot of other steps are required in before. But for other projects, which, for example, focus on the global distribution of different mosquito species, I think these tools are quite successful because you can easily track, okay, in this region now we also have this kind of mosquito, which you otherwise would not be aware of. So there are different applications where this is already really successful and helpful for researchers and also for global public health planning.
Cool to know that I didn't know this mosquito alert app. I will look at it. That's good. And then, about the awareness and education, I was shocked by your first slide saying like with the current climate, the spread of the diseases is getting to a lot more people. So do you think there's enough awareness, or we should, put more efforts into this field, or what's your view on this?
So I always see the difference, because so I'm based in Germany, but I was also visiting Rio a few times and giving lectures at university, and I always see a big difference between the different communities. In Rio, if you ask in a lecture hall who knows dengue or who was affected by dengue, most of the people have a story to tell of lost people in their families or being really sick. And in regions where it's not that present, it's obviously not that important right now, but it will increase. And I mean, there's great research happening which are extrapolating these patterns. It's one of many consequences of climate change, of course. And what is changing is the habitats or suitability region for these mosquitoes, but it does not necessarily increase the risk, because the mosquitoes itself, they are not traveling really far, right? They are traveling really small distances. So this will slowly increase. But for example, with traffic, with trade and yeah, flight traffic and ship traffic, the mosquitoes can travel, but the pathogen, like the dengue pathogen and so on, is in most cases just distributed by the human. So we are the ones who bring the risk basically into our local communities when we are going somewhere else where this is a big thing. So, for example, in Germany, all of the current dengue cases are coming from people who have been in the tropics and came back. And then it also becomes a risk in other areas, because since we have the mosquitoes, there are two different mosquito species. One is Aedes aegypti, which is more common in tropical settings, but also Aedes albopictus can transmit the same pathogens. And since we have it in Germany, in that case, it can be dangerous, because once we have infected persons here, mosquitoes can transmit it within a really small area around these infected persons. But it's not a general risk which is rising everywhere, because these mosquitoes often cannot survive the whole year. But yeah, it's emerging hazards, but we don't have to be really afraid that, okay, we're dying tomorrow. So
No,
and I think tackling the disease in locations like Rio, which are global hotspots, also for international mobility and so on. So there are regular large outbreaks in Rio during the carnival season in February. Tackling the disease there has sometimes more impacts at the moment than thinking about problems here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Are you still engaged with this project? Because February is, well, it's now, right?
February is now, yeah.
Are you connected to, do you have a project now in this region, or what are your plans, like immediate plans?
Yeah, so the city of Singapore is also interested in developing similar methods for Singapore, and together with Fiocruz, we are about to do more research on smart trap technology and would like to integrate them into the city in Rio. So this operational center is really interested in digital innovation, digital solutions, and as they have a core team working on disease outbreaks, because it's a big thing there. Not only during COVID, it's a yearly thing where the healthcare is reaching its capacity. It's a good place to try out things and then maybe further transfer to other regions. So yeah.
Okay, very, very challenging and very good prospects
Yeah. And I think also the research in smart trap technology itself, working on bioacoustics, it's also an ongoing research topic, because especially in an urban context, you have a lot of background noise. And you have to find a way to filter that out. Then there's questions how to process all this data which is captured, all the audio data or video data. There are different compression techniques which can be applied without a reduction in the performance of the deep learning models for the detections and so on. So a lot of research happening and many communities and researchers working on that.
That's good. And those smart traps that you showed, for me, it was, I thought, because when you think of Internet of Things, you think of small.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need to be big.
No, that's a good question. So in some cities, they are integrated in objects of common use, like trash bins or bus stations, for example, where you don't see them, but they need some power, right? So a lot of bus stations have access to electricity for showing the bus timetable or so on, or they need some solar panel or whatever. And they should not be placed in really high altitude, like on a high tower or so, because the mosquitoes don't fly up that far. So they have to be located somewhere on the ground, and many cities are trying to incorporate them into the urban design, so people basically don't notice them.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't have to be that big. There are different kind of traps and different technologies, also from industry. Yeah.
Okay, super, super interesting. I think we're, we're running out of time. There's no more questions for the audience. I think I'll thank you again, Stephen, for sharing all your research and insight in the topic. And yeah, we can call you in a few years, so you let us know how you progressed on the topic. No?
Yes, I will.
All the best for the projects ahead. Yep. Okay.
Thank you very much for having me here and for the nice introduction and questions.
Okay. Thank you to the audience as well, and for
Yeah.
AF and the Aedes network. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and everyone feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'm gonna close.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.